Okay, today we are diving into the story of Ada Lovelace. Now that's a name a lot of you probably know, but what if I told you the most famous thing about her isn't actually the most important thing about her? Yeah, let's get into the real story behind the legend.
So, for most people, Ada Lovelace is known by this one incredible title, the world's first computer programmer. And hey, it's a fantastic claim to fame. It's why she's celebrated every single year on Ada Lovelace Day. And look, that title is technically true, but just focusing on that, it's kind of like calling Beethoven a guy who was just good at hitting piano keys. You completely miss the music. Her real genius was something way, way deeper. To really get what made her so special, we have to go back to her origins. Because you see, she was the product of two powerful and completely opposing forces. Ada's whole life was shaped by this massive intellectual clash. On one hand, her father was Lord Byron, the definition of a wild, romantic poet. On the other, her mother was Annabella Milbank, a brilliant mathematician who was even nicknamed the Princess of Parallelograms. Her mother was so terrified Ada would inherit her father's poetic madness that she forced a super strict education in math and logic on her, hoping to stamp out any of that imaginative stuff.
Well, it didn't quite work. Instead of crushing her imagination, all that intense logical training just gave it a new language to speak. Ada ended up blending these two sides of her heritage into this unique approach she called Poetical Science. It was all about using imagination to see the grand, abstract possibilities, and then using hard math to actually build them.
This is how she saw herself, and honestly, it's the perfect way to understand her work. The analyst was the detail-oriented, logical part of her mind that could grind through complex calculations. But the metaphysician, that was the visionary, the part that could see beyond the numbers into a whole new universe of what could be.
And that brings us to the machine at the heart of her story, Charles Babbage's Analytical Engine. Now, get this. It was a theoretical, steam-powered computer that was never actually built. But the design, it was incredibly modern. We're talking a CPU, what we'd call RAM, and even input/output systems. It was basically a blueprint for a computer just 100 years too early.
So you could say Babbage invented the hardware, but it was really Lovelace who first dreamed up the software. Her big breakthrough came when she was asked to translate an article by an Italian engineer about Babbage's engine. But she didn't just translate it. Oh no. She added her own notes. And these notes were so detailed, so profound, that they ended up being 3 times longer than the original article itself. This is where her genius really takes center stage.
And the most famous of these notes is note G. This is it. This is her claim to the title of first programmer. Because inside note G, you'll find what is now widely considered to be the very first published computer algorithm in history.
So what did this first-ever program actually do? Well, it laid out all the steps for calculating a really complex series of numbers, Bernoulli numbers. But the key thing here isn't the math. It's why she chose this problem. She picked something deliberately hard to prove that this machine could do more than just basic arithmetic. She showed it could follow a complex, repeating set of instructions, what we would all now call a loop.
And hey, here's a fun little fact for all the programmers watching. When modern computer scientists actually tested her algorithm, they found a mistake, a small typo, probably the publisher's fault, that would have made the program crash. It's now lovingly called the oldest bug in computing history. So yeah, debugging has been part of the game since day one. This is where the metaphysician, the visionary, just takes over. Lovelace made this absolutely incredible conceptual leap. She compared the analytical engine to a jacquard loom, a machine that used punch cards to weave super complex patterns like flowers and leaves into fabric. And this metaphor is everything. She basically said if a machine can use cards to manipulate threads, why couldn't a different machine use cards to manipulate symbols, like algebra? And boom, that one insight just blew the doors off what a computer could be. She realized it wasn't just a number cruncher. It was a general-purpose machine that could manipulate any information that could be represented by symbols, logic, algebra, even music. In this amazing flight of imagination, she wrote that the engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music. She literally predicted digital music a century before it was a thing. But here's what makes her so brilliant. Just as she saw the machine's unbelievable potential, her poetical science also let her see its fundamental limits. This sentence right here,
is one of the most important in the history of computing. She argued that the machine could follow our orders with incredible speed and accuracy, but it couldn't originate ideas. It couldn't create anything new on its own. It could only do what we, the programmers, knew how to tell it to do.
That observation, which we now call Lady Lovelace's objection, basically set the stage for the central question of artificial intelligence for the next 150 years. I mean, in the 1950s, the great Alan Turing made her objection a cornerstone of his famous paper on computing. It was the main argument he felt he had to defeat to prove a machine could think.
And isn't this just wild? The very question she was asking back in 1843 is the exact same debate we are having right this minute about generative AI. Can these new models truly create, or are they just really, really good at executing what we've ordered them to do? Her foresight is just staggering.
So when you put all of these pieces together, what you see is a figure who was so far ahead of her time, a truly modern thinker in every sense of the word. You know, her work was so advanced that it was pretty much ignored for 100 years. It wasn't until the dawn of the electronic computer age that people like Alan Turing rediscovered her work and finally realized just how important it was. Now, of course, her legacy is everywhere, from the Ada programming language named after her to the global celebration of her work every year.
Which brings us right back to where we started. Is first programmer the right title? Well, yeah, it's justified, but it just feels incomplete. A more accurate title might be something like the world's first published algorithmic theorist, because her real gift wasn't just writing the steps of a program, it was explaining what those steps meant for the future of humanity.
So here's the bottom line. Charles Babbage invented a machine. Ada Lovelace invented the idea of the computer. She gave us the entire philosophical framework for computation. She imagined this world of symbolic logic and creative machines long before the first computer ever flickered to life. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought, inspired by her whole poetical science idea. She proved that the biggest analytical breakthroughs need a healthy dose of that metaphysical, poetic imagination. And it really makes you wonder, as we face our own huge challenges today, from AI ethics to climate change, what's the poetry that we need to find those truly revolutionary solutions?